Mid-flight drama. Black pilot takes action after flight attendant's accusation. A tense hush fell over the cabin as Captain Elijah Barnes, a seasoned black pilot with years of impeccable service, entered the flight deck. He was calm, collected, and yet fully aware of the simmering tension building among the crew. Moments earlier, a flight attendant named Karen Mitchell had confronted him with a veiled accusation, claiming he had falsified flight information. Her tone was sharp, dripping with authority, and yet suspiciously personal, as though she doubted his professional integrity. Passengers nearby sensed the unease, some glancing toward the cockpit doors, others whispering to their companions, puzzled by the unusual standoff. Elijah's heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from a deep understanding of the stakes involved. He knew that one wrong word could escalate a minor conflict into a public spectacle, one that could put his career and dignity on the line. The cabin's soft hum of engines seemed almost deafening, punctuating the heavy silence that had fallen. He adjusted his uniform jacket and cleared his throat softly, exuding a controlled authority that immediately contrasted with Karen's aggressive posture. The flight attendants gathered at the entrance of the cockpit, their expressions a mix of loyalty, discomfort, and curiosity, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Karen's lips pressed into a tight line, and her eyes darted nervously as she attempted to assert dominance over a man whose reputation and skill could not be questioned. The accusation itself, though veiled, carried undertones that spoke of implicit bias, and Elijah recognized it immediately. It wasn't the first time he had experienced suspicion or undue scrutiny, but this moment was unique. It was public, it was humiliating, and it threatened to undermine his authority in front of both colleagues and passengers. He drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of experience, training, and professionalism pressing down on him, reminding him that his response must be measured yet decisive. Elijah's mind raced through the options: confront, escalate, or neutralize. Neutralizing the situation was his chosen path, relying not on anger or confrontation, but on strategic action, the kind that would ensure accountability while maintaining safety and decorum. Passengers continued to murmur, some casting uneasy glances toward the cockpit, sensing that the dynamics unfolding were far from ordinary. The overhead bins rattled as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, creating a subtle but persistent background noise that underscored the tension, a constant reminder that the situation was happening mid-flight, in a confined, highly scrutinized environment. Elijah's eyes met Karen's briefly, a silent acknowledgement that he understood both her intent and her limitations. He had seen such behavior before, individuals trying to assert power through intimidation, relying on systemic assumptions rather than facts. The moment demanded clarity, precision, and a demonstration of both authority and moral fortitude. He reached into his pocket, subtly pulling out his encrypted company phone, knowing that the call he was about to make would shift the power dynamics entirely. Karen, oblivious to his next move, continued to assert her unfounded claim, leaning slightly forward, her body language aggressive, attempting to dominate the space through sheer force of presence. Elijah's fingers hovered over the dial, feeling a mix of anticipation and resolve, fully aware that this call would change the course of events not just for this flight, but for the individuals involved, and potentially for the corporate hierarchy that had permitted such unchecked bias to occur. In that split second, Elijah considered the broader implications: corporate accountability, racial equity, and passenger safety. He understood that his actions would set a precedent for how discrimination and false accusations were handled within the airline, and possibly the industry at large. He pressed the call button, the subtle vibration against his palm a signal that the moment of intervention had arrived. Karen's attention remained fixed on her immediate goal, discrediting him, but she failed to anticipate the institutional weight Elijah commanded. The phone rang once, twice, and then connected. Elijah spoke succinctly, his voice calm but firm, issuing precise instructions that would ensure immediate accountability. Within moments, the airline's executive office confirmed receipt of the call, signaling that intervention was imminent. Karen's eyes widened. the color draining from her face as she realized that the simple accusation she had believed would dominate the narrative was about to be dismantled through authority and protocol. Passengers, unaware of the corporate drama unfolding just beyond their view, continued with the routine of the flight, blissfully ignorant that they were witnessing the first moments of what would become a landmark confrontation. The call concluded, and Elijah returned the phone to his pocket, a quiet but potent smile playing across his lips. Karen, sensing the shift, faltered, her confidence undermined by the reality that her actions were now being reviewed at the highest level. The weight of institutional oversight had arrived, and the scales of accountability were beginning to tip. The rest of the flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, some realizing that complicity could no longer shield them from scrutiny. Passengers remained largely unaware, though a few had begun to sense a subtle change in the atmosphere, a tension that hinted at unfolding drama. Elijah exhaled slowly, knowing the immediate threat had been neutralized, but aware that the fallout would be far-reaching. Karen's voice, once sharp and commanding, had lost its certainty. The knowledge that executives were monitoring and reviewing her behavior had altered the power dynamic entirely. Mid-flight, the airline's communication channels buzzed with alerts, directives, and confirmations, orchestrating a swift administrative response that would culminate in the immediate termination of Karen's employment. Elijah maintained composure, conveying both authority and calm to the passengers, ensuring that the incident, though intense, remained contained and professional. In the cabin, a subtle but palpable shift occurred. Flight attendants, once hesitant or complicit, now observed the chain of command and the seriousness of institutional oversight. Passengers remained unaware of the full extent of the confrontation, but would later learn, through viral accounts and social media, of the extraordinary measures taken to uphold justice. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, Karen was already receiving notifications from the executive office, confirming her termination effective immediately, a direct consequence of her false accusation and the discrimination implicit in her actions. Elijah continued to monitor the situation, ensuring that passengers were safe and calm, fully aware that the mid-flight environment amplified every tension. The resolution, though still in its early stages, had already set a precedent for accountability and ethical intervention, illustrating how authority combined with moral courage could right an immediate wrong while signaling long-term consequences. By the time the plane prepared for landing, the corporate review had confirmed all actions, ensuring that Elijah's professional reputation remained intact. Passengers' safety was unquestioned, and systemic issues within the airline were being addressed. This moment, tense, dramatic, and decisive, would later be recounted as an example of courage under pressure, the efficacy of strategic intervention, and the critical importance of accountability at every level of corporate and operational hierarchy. Captain Elijah Barnes exhaled slowly, allowing a brief moment of reflection amidst the tension that had just erupted in the flight deck. Years of experience in aviation had trained him to maintain composure in even the most extreme circumstances, yet moments like these carried an emotional weight that few could truly understand. He had risen through the ranks with a combination of skill, diligence, and resilience, navigating a field historically dominated by individuals who often underestimated him at first glance. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, Elijah had grown up acutely aware of societal inequities, and from a young age, he had developed an unwavering commitment to professionalism, excellence, and integrity. His parents instilled in him the values of perseverance and accountability, emphasizing that one's conduct would always define them more than others' perceptions. He carried that ethos into every cockpit he entered, every decision he made, and every interaction he had with passengers and crew. On this particular flight, Elijah was not just responsible for steering the aircraft safely across thousands of miles, but also for setting a standard of conduct that reflected his experience, authority, and moral compass. Beside him, co-pilot Andrea Collins, a sharp and meticulous professional, noted the subtle tension radiating from the cabin. Andrea had worked alongside Elijah for several years, respecting his judgment and benefiting from his guidance, while quietly observing the nuances of his leadership style. Together, they formed a team that balanced technical precision with strategic foresight, each anticipating the other's moves while maintaining open communication under pressure. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers settled into their routines, unaware that a conflict of significant consequence was unfolding just beyond the cockpit doors. Families adjusted their seating, children played quietly, and travelers scrolled through their devices, oblivious to the storm brewing at the helm of their journey. Flight attendants moved along the aisles, their motions efficient yet cautious, instinctively sensing a subtle disruption that did not align with the usual rhythm of service. Karen Mitchell, the flight attendant whose confrontation had ignited the crisis, was now visibly flustered, her composure unraveling as she realized the far-reaching consequences of her actions. Her earlier confidence had been built on assumptions, bias, and a misjudgment of authority, all of which were now crumbling under the weight of procedural oversight. Elijah's personal stakes were not merely professional. They were profoundly connected to his identity, reputation, and the broader message that his conduct would send about accountability and fairness in a workplace historically marred by systemic inequities. The tension extended beyond the immediate personnel. It encompassed institutional history, societal expectations, and the moral implications of responding effectively to discrimination in real time. As Elijah adjusted the headset and reviewed the flight systems, he mentally charted the sequence of events that would need to unfold to ensure both safety and justice. He was methodical, anticipating potential resistance, emotional reactions, and public scrutiny. Each decision required careful consideration, for one misstep could exacerbate the situation, affecting not only his career but the well-being of passengers, crew, and the integrity of the airline. He recalled early experiences in his career when he had been underestimated, when microaggressions and unspoken biases had complicated his ability to perform. Those moments had honed his capacity for strategic action under duress, teaching him that patience, composure, and decisive intervention often outweighed immediate confrontation. Andrea Collins, sensing the gravity of the situation, offered a quiet nod of support. Her presence was a stabilizing force, reinforcing the silent communication that had allowed them to navigate countless flights successfully. Passengers continued to move about the cabin, occasionally glancing toward the cockpit with curiosity, but remaining unaware of the complexity of the confrontation taking place. Elijah's mind shifted between situational awareness and tactical planning. He noted Karen's posture, the other attendants' reactions, and the passengers' subtle cues, integrating this information to guide his next move. Beyond the immediate flight, Elijah reflected on his broader responsibilities, mentoring young pilots, advocating for equity in aviation, and embodying professionalism in ways that could influence systemic change. He understood that actions taken in moments like these resonated far beyond the physical boundaries of the aircraft, shaping perceptions, policies, and the lived experiences of those who would follow in his footsteps. In the midst of this, he considered the passengers, including a young black boy seated near the front who had innocently observed the tension, perhaps not fully understanding the nuances but sensing the emotional charge. Elijah's response would not only assert his authority, but also model dignity, fairness, and courage for those quietly witnessing the ordeal. He reviewed potential outcomes in his mind. Karen could escalate, fellow attendants might take sides, passengers could intervene, or administrative support could arrive mid-flight. Each scenario demanded foresight and a calculated approach. The call he had made earlier to the executive office had set wheels in motion, but the immediate atmosphere required continued vigilance. He needed to manage perception, maintain professionalism, and prepare for the cascade of responses that would inevitably follow. Reflecting on personal history, professional ethos, and moral obligation, Elijah understood that his conduct in these next moments would define the narrative not just for this flight, but for how authority, accountability, and integrity were recognized in the aviation sector. He adjusted the instruments, double-checked systems, and maintained a calm demeanor, knowing that patience and composure were as crucial as any technical maneuver. Beyond the procedural, he also considered the human aspect, the emotions of Karen, the anxieties of the crew, and the curiosity of the passengers, each requiring nuanced observation and response. Elijah's strategic foresight extended to anticipating the corporate response post-flight, ensuring that documentation, communications, and witness accounts would accurately reflect the sequence of events. He prepared to present a detailed, factual account, emphasizing professionalism while highlighting discriminatory conduct and procedural violations. As the flight continued, the cabin settled into a tentative rhythm, though subtle tension lingered. Passengers remained mostly unaware, yet the crew navigated the delicate balance of performing routine duties while witnessing an unfolding drama that could have far-reaching implications. Elijah's presence served as both anchor and shield, maintaining safety, authority, and moral clarity. This was more than a professional challenge. It was an embodiment of personal integrity, racial equity, and the power of strategic action under duress, setting a precedent for accountability and demonstrating the profound impact of calm, decisive leadership in moments of conflict. In that suspended atmosphere, Elijah remained focused, aware that the narrative was only partially visible to those around him, yet confident that the steps he had taken would ensure justice, safety, and clarity both mid-flight and beyond. As the aircraft ascended into the stratosphere, the tension in the cabin remained palpable, though outwardly passengers appeared calm. Flight attendants moved about with deliberate precision, subtly monitoring the situation that had begun to disrupt the usual rhythm of service. Karen Mitchell, still flushed from the confrontation with Captain Elijah Barnes, attempted to regain composure, but her movements betrayed uncertainty and an underlying fear of repercussions she had not anticipated. The other attendants exchanged quick glances, silently acknowledging that a deviation from protocol had occurred, yet unsure of the proper course of action. Every step Karen took was scrutinized, not only by her peers but by Elijah from the cockpit, who maintained an unbroken line of observation, analyzing tone, body language, and the potential for further escalation. Passengers, oblivious to most of the backstory, occasionally noticed the subtle tension, the slightly strained interactions, the occasional sharpness in voice, the hurried movements in the aisles, but interpreted them as standard mid-flight stress rather than the beginning of a significant confrontation. Meanwhile, Elijah and Andrea Collins remained vigilant, balancing operational responsibilities with the unfolding human drama. Elijah's mind cycled through contingency plans, considering both immediate and downstream impacts. Should Karen escalate her behavior further? How would other crew members respond? Would passengers become involved, either attempting to mediate or inadvertently exacerbating the tension? Each scenario required careful thought, balancing procedural adherence with moral clarity. The young black boy seated near the front, who had witnessed the initial incident, now fidgeted nervously, sensing a shift in energy but lacking the language or experience to fully comprehend the racial dynamics at play. Elijah's awareness of the boy's perspective added a personal dimension to his responsibility. The stakes were not solely professional, but also profoundly human, affecting impressionable minds and shaping perceptions of fairness, authority, and justice. Throughout the cabin, microaggressions surfaced subtly, passengers asking unnecessary questions, making offhand remarks, or directing their scrutiny toward Elijah, whose visible authority as a black pilot challenged their expectations. These moments, though small, accumulated into a complex emotional landscape that required him to remain calm, assertive, and strategic, ensuring the integrity of the flight and the dignity of all involved. Andrea Collins mirrored Elijah's focus, subtly guiding Karen when she faltered, redirecting interactions to maintain operational flow while indirectly correcting procedural missteps. The cabin, though physically constrained, became a theater of nuanced power dynamics, a space where every word, gesture, and glance carried heightened significance. Elijah reflected on past experiences navigating systemic biases in aviation, recalling instances where judgment had been clouded by racial assumptions and where microaggressions had undermined his authority. Those experiences informed his present approach, emphasizing patience, meticulous observation, and the strategic deployment of influence to restore order and assert justice without unnecessary confrontation. As the flight progressed, tension ebbed and flowed, punctuated by moments of near conflict, a miscommunication over service procedures, a passenger questioning a decision, or a subtle challenge from Karen herself, testing boundaries and assessing the limits of his authority. Elijah's responses were calculated, a mix of calm assertiveness and controlled empathy, aimed at de-escalating potential crises while maintaining procedural adherence. Every action in the cabin was intertwined with moral accountability. His leadership was both performative and principled, setting an example for crew, passengers, and the broader industry watching from afar. The executive office, previously contacted, remained on alert, prepared to intervene if necessary, though Elijah preferred to resolve the situation through on-site authority, demonstrating the effectiveness of measured professional action. Passengers, though largely unaware of the broader implications, experienced the subtle tension in different ways, some anxious, others curious, and a few oblivious to the underlying racial and procedural dynamics shaping their environment. Elijah's strategic thinking extended to anticipating media attention, social scrutiny, and institutional responses, understanding that an incident of this nature could reverberate beyond the immediate flight, influencing policy, public perception, and professional reputation. Each decision was layered with consequence, balancing operational safety, personal integrity, and moral responsibility. Karen, now visibly more guarded, attempted to continue her duties, though small errors began to accumulate, a slight misplacement of items, a hurried approach to passengers, and hesitations in her speech, all reflective of the psychological pressure mounting as she recognized the seriousness of the unfolding events. Elijah monitored these signs carefully, mentally noting patterns and preparing to intervene decisively should further disruption occur. Andrea, aware of the broader stakes, subtly reinforced Elijah's authority, guiding passengers' interactions when necessary and maintaining a calm, professional demeanor to buffer potential escalation. In the midst of this, the young boy's father observed silently, the implications of the flight attendant's actions weighing heavily on him as he recognized the intersection of bias, power, and accountability unfolding in real time. The cabin atmosphere became a microcosm of societal dynamics, highlighting issues of race, authority, privilege, and responsibility, all compressed within the confines of a commercial flight. Every interaction, from verbal exchanges to subtle glances, carried layered meanings, challenging Elijah to navigate complex social terrain while upholding the fundamental responsibilities of his role as pilot in command. Microaggressions continued to surface, passengers questioning his decisions more rigorously than they would a white counterpart. Subtle resistance from colleagues and the underlying tension in every procedural interaction, forcing him to maintain unwavering focus, moral clarity, and emotional intelligence. Elijah's reflection extended to institutional responsibilities, anticipating how the airline's reputation, internal policies, and societal expectations might respond to a documented incident of racial tension and procedural challenge. These considerations informed his decisions, reinforcing the importance of strategic action, careful documentation, and professional composure in achieving both immediate and long-term resolution. As the flight neared its cruising altitude, Elijah's mind synthesized real-time observations, passenger dynamics, crew behaviors, and potential escalations, allowing him to act preemptively rather than reactively. His decisions were guided by principle, experience, and an acute awareness of the broader societal implications, reinforcing that leadership in moments of tension demanded more than technical skill. It required strategic moral judgment. By methodically managing the cabin environment, observing subtle cues, and maintaining a steady presence, Elijah ensured that the situation, though tense, remained under control, setting the stage for the pivotal turning point that would soon redefine authority, accountability, and justice on this flight. The cabin tension reached its zenith as Captain Elijah Barnes, fully aware of the cumulative microaggressions, procedural missteps, and underlying racial biases that had shaped the flight thus far, prepared to take decisive action that would forever alter the dynamics in the enclosed, pressurized environment of the aircraft. Every second counted, and his mind raced through contingency plans with the precision of a seasoned pilot and the strategic insight of someone who had navigated similar challenges throughout his career. Karen Mitchell, the flight attendant whose confrontation had sparked this escalating conflict, moved nervously through the aisles, attempting to maintain an appearance of professionalism. Yet every gesture betrayed her growing apprehension. Passengers, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, began to notice subtle changes. The firmness in Elijah's posture, the way he directed his voice with calm authority, and the purposeful glances exchanged between him and Andrea Collins, his trusted co-pilot and confidant. The young black boy near the front of the cabin watched intently, unaware of the larger societal implications, but acutely aware of the charged environment around him. Elijah's hand hovered over his communication device, contemplating the critical call that would serve as both intervention and declaration of authority. His mental calculations encompassed a myriad of factors: the potential corporate ramifications, legal implications, passenger perceptions, and the profound moral responsibility to confront the injustice unfolding before him. Karen, sensing that her authority was being challenged, attempted a preemptive defense, raising procedural objections and citing airline regulations. Yet her voice lacked conviction, undermined by the knowledge that her actions had been observed, documented, and morally questioned. Andrea, recognizing the critical moment, subtly positioned herself to support Elijah's actions, providing calm reassurance while ensuring operational continuity. The passengers' murmurings grew louder, a chorus of curiosity, anxiety, and tentative judgment, each person interpreting the unfolding scenario through their own lens, some sympathizing, others unconsciously aligning with prior biases. Elijah, drawing upon years of experience navigating both racial and hierarchical challenges, initiated the call to the airline's executive office, a line of communication that would serve as the turning point in the conflict. The air vibrated with anticipation. Every crew member and passenger held their breath as the weight of the call's implications settled over the cabin. As he spoke, Elijah's voice remained measured, articulate, and resolute, conveying both the gravity of the situation and the authority vested in him as pilot in command. The details relayed, Karen's procedural violations, the microaggressions, and the racially charged behavior were presented with precision, supported by observations from Andrea and corroborated by other crew members. The response from the executive office was immediate, reflecting both surprise and the recognition of the critical need for swift intervention. Karen's face paled as she realized the full extent of the consequences, the culmination of her actions crystallizing in a moment of stark clarity. Within minutes, directives were issued for her immediate removal from the flight, a decision that sent ripples through the cabin. Passengers, now fully cognizant of the extraordinary measures being taken, reacted with a mixture of shock, curiosity, and admiration for Elijah's poised handling of the situation. The young boy's father, witnessing the swift and decisive justice, allowed himself a cautious relief, recognizing that authority had been properly asserted and that the principles of fairness and accountability had been upheld. Karen, escorted from the cabin under the watchful eye of Andrea and security personnel, experienced a profound personal reckoning, the ramifications of her actions hitting with unyielding force. Elijah, remaining in command, ensured that operational procedures continued without disruption, balancing the culmination of the confrontation with the need to maintain flight safety and passenger comfort. The psychological weight of the climax settled over the crew and passengers alike, a potent reminder that authority, justice, and moral courage were intertwined, and that failure to act decisively in moments of systemic bias could result in far-reaching consequences. Observing the reactions of those around him, Elijah reflected on the broader societal implications, the necessity of confronting injustice, the courage required to challenge entrenched hierarchies, and the power inherent in strategic principled action. Andrea, maintaining composure, subtly guided the cabin's energy, reinforcing the sense of order and safety while acknowledging the moral victory that had just been achieved. The young boy, absorbing the events with a mix of awe and relief, witnessed firsthand a powerful demonstration of leadership, accountability, and the importance of standing firm in the face of unfairness. Passengers engaged in quiet conversations, exchanging interpretations and reflections. The social dynamic now irrevocably shifted by the courageous intervention of a black pilot asserting authority against systemic prejudice. Elijah's mental focus remained sharp, documenting the sequence of events meticulously for both operational records and potential corporate review, ensuring that every action taken was accounted for and defensible. The resolution of the confrontation, though operationally seamless, carried a symbolic weight, demonstrating that leadership grounded in principle and moral clarity could override entrenched biases and enforce justice in real time. The cabin atmosphere, once tense and charged with potential conflict, gradually transitioned to one of respect, cautious optimism, and renewed order, a testament to the effectiveness of strategic, ethically guided intervention. Elijah, acknowledging the significance of the moment, maintained professional poise while internally reflecting on the lessons reinforced, the necessity of vigilance, the courage to act decisively, and the profound impact that a single, well-timed intervention could have on both individuals and institutional culture. As the flight continued toward its destination, the narrative of authority, morality, and accountability had been indelibly etched into the experience of every individual present, ensuring that the climax of this dramatic confrontation would resonate far beyond the confines of the cabin. The culmination of tension, the assertion of justice, and the undeniable moral victory achieved through measured, deliberate action established a new precedent, reinforcing that discrimination, procedural violations, and bias could be effectively countered through strategic, ethically grounded leadership. In the wake of this pivotal moment, passengers, crew, and observers were left with a powerful example of courage under pressure, demonstrating that authority paired with moral clarity could decisively resolve even the most charged, racially nuanced confrontations. The immediate crisis had been resolved, yet its implications, rippling through perceptions, professional hierarchies, and social expectations, would continue to influence behavior, policy, and societal understanding long after the flight had landed. Elijah, fully aware of the broader significance, prepared to guide the flight toward its final descent, reflecting on the transformative power of principled action and the enduring impact of confronting systemic injustice in real time. The culmination of the conflict, executed with precision, courage, and moral fortitude, set the stage for the aftermath, revealing both the personal and societal consequences of standing resolutely against prejudice and affirming the values of accountability, fairness, and ethical leadership in a complex, high-stakes environment. The aftermath of the confrontation unfolded with a mixture of relief, reflection, and societal reverberation that extended far beyond the cabin of Flight 472. Passengers, once tense and uncertain, now absorbed the gravity of what had just occurred, understanding that they had witnessed not only a resolution to an immediate conflict, but also a broader statement about justice, authority, and accountability. Captain Elijah Barnes, maintaining the calm, steady demeanor that had defined his leadership throughout the crisis, now focused on documenting every detail of the events, ensuring that operational records, crew statements, and passenger observations were meticulously noted for both corporate review and potential media scrutiny. Andrea Collins, his co-pilot and steadfast ally, moved through the cabin with composed authority, checking in with passengers, calming anxious families, and subtly reinforcing the moral victory that had just been achieved. The young boy and his parents, still processing the sudden turbulence of emotions, allowed themselves a cautious optimism, recognizing that the systemic bias they had faced was addressed decisively by someone with both moral courage and positional authority. News of the incident, already captured by some alert passengers' devices, began circulating through social media, sparking conversations about racial dynamics in professional environments, the responsibilities of airline staff, and the importance of leadership grounded in justice. Airline executives, informed of the situation in real time, immediately convened internal reviews, acknowledging both the procedural violations by Karen Mitchell and the exemplary manner in which Captain Barnes had handled the crisis. The decision to remove her from the flight was accompanied by swift corporate communications, outlining new training programs, reinforcing accountability measures, and sending a clear message regarding the consequences of discriminatory behavior. As the plane descended toward its destination, Elijah and Andrea reflected on the broader societal implications, the necessity of vigilance in the face of bias, the courage required to act decisively, and the ripple effect that one principled decision could have on organizational culture and public perception. Passengers engaged in reflective discussions, some expressing admiration for the decisive action, others considering their own complicity or inaction in the face of systemic inequities, and many sharing their perspectives on social media, ensuring that the story reached a far larger audience than those physically present on the flight. The corporate response, swift and transparent, reinforced the notion that systemic issues could be addressed effectively through accountability, moral clarity, and operational oversight. Employees across the airline, from flight attendants to administrative staff, began receiving briefings and training sessions emphasizing the importance of fairness, unbiased behavior, and ethical decision-making, demonstrating that the consequences of a single incident could reshape organizational priorities. Media outlets quickly picked up the story, highlighting both the initial injustice and the resolution, framing Captain Barnes's actions as a case study in effective leadership, crisis management, and moral responsibility under pressure. Public discourse, fueled by videos and first-hand accounts, centered not only on the microaggressions and procedural violations that had initiated the conflict, but also on the power dynamics, racial implications, and ethical considerations inherent in such high-stakes confrontations. The young boy, now somewhat reassured by the visible and immediate response, witnessed firsthand the tangible impact of courage and accountability, internalizing lessons about authority, fairness, and standing up against injustice that would shape his understanding of societal dynamics for years to come. Families on the flight, colleagues, and observers reflected on the broader narrative. That authority, when paired with ethical clarity, could correct wrongs swiftly and definitively, offering both immediate relief and long-term lessons about societal responsibility. Captain Barnes, aware of the personal and professional weight of the incident, prepared comprehensive reports, anticipating questions from the airline board, regulatory bodies, and possibly legal authorities, ensuring that every action was transparent, justified, and documented. Andrea Collins, observing his thoroughness and moral consistency, reinforced her respect for his leadership, understanding that the resolution was not only operationally effective, but also symbolically powerful, creating a precedent for addressing similar conflicts in the future. Passengers, increasingly aware of the stakes and implications, shared conversations, recordings, and reflections online, sparking discussions about racial injustice in aviation, workplace dynamics, and the responsibilities of those in positions of power to act decisively. Airline executives, balancing operational continuity with reputational considerations, enacted immediate policy reviews, reinforcing standards of conduct, reporting procedures, and accountability frameworks to prevent recurrence. The broader public, through social media amplification and news coverage, recognized the transformative nature of Captain Barnes's intervention, appreciating the alignment of authority, morality, and courage in resolving a situation that had threatened both personal dignity and organizational integrity. The young boy, processing the ordeal alongside his family, began to internalize a foundational lesson about justice, that one person, when equipped with knowledge, authority, and moral clarity, could enact change even in environments historically resistant to fairness. Flight attendants and crew members, observing the consequences of Karen Mitchell's actions, reflected on their responsibilities, recognizing that professional authority required ethical judgment, cultural sensitivity, and accountability at all times. As the flight completed its descent, passengers prepared for disembarkation, conversations filled with a mix of awe, reflection, and hope, each individual carrying with them a story of courage, decisive action, and the reinforcement of ethical standards in the face of adversity. Captain Barnes, surveying the cabin one final time, ensured that every detail was addressed, reinforcing the moral victory while simultaneously maintaining operational excellence, underscoring that justice and leadership were inseparable in high-pressure contexts. The young boy's father, expressing gratitude, acknowledged the importance of witnessing ethical leadership in action, understanding that the events of the flight would resonate with his family and broader community for years to come. Andrea, coordinating with ground staff and executives, emphasized the significance of documenting lessons learned, ensuring that the resolution translated into actionable policies and future training for the airline workforce. Passengers, continuing to discuss the incident, began recognizing the larger societal narratives intertwined with the immediate conflict. The role of authority, the courage to act against injustice, and the long-term implications for organizational culture. Media coverage, expanding beyond local outlets to national and international platforms, highlighted the story as a testament to ethical leadership, demonstrating that swift, principled action could override bias, restore fairness, and set a precedent for systemic change. Airline leadership, responding to both public and internal pressures, committed to ongoing training, diversity awareness programs, and policy reviews to prevent future incidents and ensure alignment with ethical standards. The young boy, inspired by the unfolding events, began to understand that witnessing integrity in action was as formative as experiencing injustice itself, embedding lessons about courage, fairness, and accountability into his perception of societal roles. Passengers disembarking shared their reflections, videos, and commentary, ensuring that the incident's narrative would continue to influence discourse, highlight the importance of ethical leadership, and reinforce societal expectations for accountability. Captain Barnes, reflecting on the entire ordeal, recognized the profound impact of combining authority with moral courage, understanding that the outcome was not only an immediate resolution, but also a blueprint for confronting systemic bias in real-world contexts. The resolution of the incident, encompassing corporate action, public recognition, and personal triumphs, reinforced the central lesson that justice, accountability, and ethical leadership could decisively address inequities while setting enduring precedents for future conduct. By the time the passengers exited the airport, the story of the black pilot who confronted bias, asserted authority, and enforced ethical standards had permeated social media, news coverage, and personal narratives, establishing a transformative example of courage, principle, and decisive action.